The year was 2789. Humanity had finally stepped beyond its solar system and joined the network of countless alien civilizations. The galaxy was a vast ocean of stars, but among them one name stood higher than all others: the Xerian Empire. It was the oldest, strongest, and most advanced empire known to exist. Its borders stretched across hundreds of star systems. Its ruler, Empress Seraphis IX, was said to have lived for over 1,000 years. Her word was law. Her silence was fear. Her eyes were cold light, said to see through lies and souls alike. No human had ever stood in her presence, until now. The Council of Earth had chosen Ambassador Lyra Vance to represent humanity in their first meeting with the Xerian Empire. She was 32 years old, sharp-minded, calm, and known for her warm way of speaking. She believed that understanding could do what weapons could not. The journey to the Xerian capital world Varian took weeks through folded space. From her ship's window, Lyra watched the stars bend and twist like ribbons of silver. She thought of the moment ahead, the first meeting between a human and the Empress of the most powerful empire in the galaxy. When the ship arrived, the Xerian world looked like a giant blue crystal floating in space. Vast towers reached toward the clouds, each glowing with soft light. The air shimmered with energy. From orbit it looked peaceful, but everyone knew beneath that peace was perfect control. Lyra was escorted by silent Xerian guards through the shining halls of the Imperial Palace. Their armor was smooth and silver, their faces hidden behind glass masks. Every step echoed softly, as if the building itself was alive. She felt nervous but did not show it. Humans were still new to this galactic stage. Many species saw them as reckless dreamers and too emotional, too fragile. But Lyra had a mission: to show that humans had something more powerful than weapons, something called heart. Finally, the great doors of the throne hall opened. The room was enormous, filled with crystal pillars and silver light. High above, the ceiling looked like a sky full of stars. The floor reflected her steps as she walked forward. Rows of alien nobles stood silently on both sides. Some looked curious, others displeased. At the far end of the hall sat Empress Seraphis IX. She sat upon a floating throne made of light, her robe flowing like mist. Her hair shimmered with silver threads and her eyes glowed softly like twin moons. She looked more like a dream than a living being. When Lyra bowed, the entire hall seemed to hold its breath. "Your Majesty," Lyra said, her voice calm and clear. "I come on behalf of Earth to bring words of peace and friendship." The Empress did not answer immediately. Her eyes studied Lyra, not her clothes, not her posture, but her soul. After a moment that felt like an eternity, she spoke. Her voice was calm and low like wind through glass. "Human of Earth," said the Empress.
"Your world is small.
"Your kind is young. Tell me, what do you hope to gain from standing before me?" Lyra took a soft breath. "Not power, not territory. We only wish to learn, to share what we know and understand what others have learned. We do not wish to rule the stars, and only to walk among them." A faint whisper ran through the nobles. No one had ever spoken to the Empress in such open human words. Most species bowed deeply, begging for alliance or trade, but this human spoke of learning, not gain. Seraphis leaned slightly forward. "You are honest," she said. "Honesty is rare among those who come here." Lyra smiled. "Where I come from, honesty is how we begin friendship." The Empress said nothing more. Her eyes lingered on Lyra for a moment longer. Then she turned her head slightly. "You will stay as guest," she said. "We will see what your kind truly is." The guard stepped forward, guiding Lyra to her chambers. The moment she left the hall, a soft murmur filled the space behind her. The nobles whispered among themselves. No one understood why the Empress had allowed the human to stay. In her room, Lyra stood by the tall glass window, looking out at the city below. Lights moved through the air like silver birds. It was beautiful but lonely. Everything was too perfect, too quiet. She thought about the Empress's eyes. They were not cruel, only empty, as if she had seen everything in the universe and nothing surprised her anymore. Lyra wondered if someone like that could ever feel joy again. The next day, the council sessions began. Dozens of alien leaders, ministers, and analysts gathered around a great round table made of white stone. Floating screens showed data, trade numbers, and star maps. Lyra presented Earth's offer: exchange of culture, knowledge, and art. The Zyrians listened politely, but they seemed uninterested. To them, humans were small and unimportant, but each time Alara spoke, the Empress watched silently. When others argued or debated, Alara remained patient. When others spoke in cold numbers, she told stories of how humans survived the Dark Ages, of how they built cities, and how they reached for the stars. She spoke not to impress, but to connect. And slowly, something began to change in the room. The cold silence softened. Even some of the Zyrian advisors began to listen more closely. That night, as the council ended, the Empress called for Alara to remain. "You speak differently," Seraphis said, her voice soft. "You speak as if you believe in something beyond logic." Alara nodded. "Yes, I believe that life means more than calculation. We may be small, but we feel deeply. That is our strength." The Empress tilted her head slightly, studying her. "Emotion is inefficient. It clouds judgment, maybe," Alara said with a gentle smile. "But it also gives meaning to what we do. Without it, power is only emptiness." For a long time, the Empress said nothing. Her glowing eyes flickered faintly as if some quiet storm passed through them. At last she said, "You are strange, human, but perhaps not unwise." It was the closest thing to a compliment the Empress had ever given to anyone. When Alara left the chamber that night, she felt something had changed. Not in her, but in the Empress. It was small, almost invisible, but real. Days passed and Alara continued her meetings. The Empire's officials showed her great cities, enormous ships, and shining technology. But everywhere she went, she saw the same thing, silence. The Zyrians had everything, yet seemed to feel nothing. No laughter, no songs. No stories told for joy. One evening, she walked alone in the Imperial Garden where silver trees glowed in the night. She heard soft footsteps behind her. When she turned, the Empress was there. "You walk without guards," Seraphis said. "You are not afraid?" Alara smiled. "Should I be?" The Empress's expression did not change, but her eyes softened. "Most are." They walked together in silence for a while. The night air shimmered gently around them. Alara said, "Your world is beautiful, but so quiet. Do your people ever celebrate?" "Celebrate?" Seraphis repeated the word slowly, as if it was ancient, once long ago. But emotion led to war, jealousy, and chaos. "We removed it to protect peace," Alara looked at her. "And are they happy?" The Empress did not answer. Her silence was enough. Later, when Alara returned to her quarters, she sat by the window again. Outside, the stars shone brighter than ever. She took out a small device and played an old Earth song, soft piano and human voices singing of hope. Across the palace, in her private chamber, Empress Seraphis sat alone on her throne, unable to focus on the data flowing before her. For the first time in centuries, her thoughts wandered. She remembered the sound of Alara's voice, and though she did not understand why, she felt something stir, something she had long forgotten existed. A quiet warmth. It was small, fragile, and impossible to explain. But it was there. That night, as the Empire slept under the silver sky, two hearts, one human and one eternal, began to move toward each other, unaware that their meeting would soon shake the entire galaxy. Morning light spread across the crystal towers of Varian, making the whole city shine like liquid silver. The air hummed softly with energy. To the Zyrians, this was the sound of perfect order. No noise, no chaos, no surprises. Everything followed logic. Everything except one small thing. A human guest named Alara Vance. For the first time in hundreds of years, the Empress had personally requested daily meetings with a foreign envoy. The court did not understand it. Some nobles whispered that the Empress was studying the human mind. Others thought she was simply being polite. But none of them knew the truth, not even the Empress herself. That morning, Alara entered the grand discussion chamber. The Empress was already there, sitting gracefully on her floating throne. Around her stood high-ranking ministers, scientists, and strategists. Every one of them was silent until she spoke. "Begin," said the Empress softly. Alara smiled and began her report. She spoke about Earth's culture, how humans expressed ideas not only with words but with music, art, and feeling. She showed them holograms of Earth's cities, of children playing, of oceans glowing under sunlight. The Zyrians watched in silence, some with confusion, some with quiet fascination. For a people who valued precision above all else, seeing such emotion was both strange and mesmerizing. When Alara showed a small video of a human orchestra performing, one minister spoke sharply. "Why do they move so much? Is this not wasteful energy?" Alara laughed softly. "It's how we feel the music. We don't just hear it, we live it." The minister looked uncertain, but the Empress raised her hand gently, silencing him. "Continue," she said, her tone softer than usual. When the video ended, Alara looked up at the Empress and said, "Music is not just sound to us. It's memory. It's how we remember love, loss, and hope." The room grew silent. The word love seemed to echo faintly in the air. It was a word that hadn't been spoken in that chamber for centuries. The Empress's silver eyes lingered on Alara. "And this? Emotion," she said slowly. "It drives your people?" Alara nodded. "Yes, it makes us brave when we are afraid. It gives us strength when logic says we should fail." The Empress leaned back, her gaze thoughtful. "Strange. In my empire, emotion once caused chaos. We removed it to preserve peace." Alara looked at her kindly. "Maybe peace without emotion isn't peace, Your Majesty. Maybe it's only silence." The room froze. No one had ever spoken to the Empress that way, gently but truthfully. Yet Seraphis did not show anger. She simply looked at Alara, long and deep, as if searching for something. "Silence," the Empress repeated softly. "Perhaps you're right." That night, after the council ended, the Empress asked for Alara to remain again. The guards left. The grand hall emptied until only the two of them remained, one human and one being who had ruled stars. The Empress spoke first. "You are fearless, Alara Vance." Alara smiled lightly. "Not fearless, Majesty, just curious." "Curious." Seraphis repeated the word as if tasting it. "Your people use emotion as a strength. You call it curiosity, passion, hope. We called it weakness. And yet your world still stands." Alara looked at her calmly. "Maybe because we are not afraid to care." For a moment, the Empress's expression softened, a small, fleeting trace of surprise mixed with admiration. "You speak as if caring is power." Alara nodded. "It is. Empires built on fear fall, but those built on understanding last longer." The Empress fell silent. Her gaze wandered to the tall window behind her throne, where distant stars shimmered. "Understanding," she said quietly. "A strange word for a ruler. Most only wish to be obeyed." "Then maybe that's what makes you different," Alara said gently. "You're listening." The Empress turned her head slowly toward Alara. For a long while she said nothing. The silence between them was not cold, and it was heavy with thought. At last she said, "You may go." Alara bowed politely and walked out. But as she did, she didn't notice the Empress still watching her even after the doors closed. Days passed. The Empress began to change in ways no one could explain. Her court noticed she spoke less of conquest and more of meaning. She began asking her advisors about the arts, paintings, music, stories, subjects long forgotten. When they could not answer, she dismissed them, lost in thought. Alara continued her talks with the council, but each day the Empress requested private discussions afterward. Sometimes they spoke for hours. They spoke of stars, of time, and of the nature of life. Alara told stories of Earth's explorers who crossed oceans without knowing what lay beyond. She told her how humanity built homes on barren worlds, how they painted even in the dark, how they dreamed even when nothing was certain. The Empress listened quietly, her silver eyes reflecting soft light. "You humans," she said once, "you live so briefly, yet you speak of eternity." Alara smiled. "Maybe that's why we value time so much. Because we know it ends." The Empress looked away. For a moment, she looked less like a ruler and more like a soul searching for something she had lost long ago. One evening, Alara was invited to a small private dinner, something the Zyrian Empire had not held for centuries. The Empress had arranged it herself. The room was quiet, filled with soft lights and a table set for two. No servants, no guards, only Alara and the Empress. "I hope the atmosphere is comfortable," Seraphis said, almost uncertainly. Alara smiled warmly. "It's perfect, Your Majesty." As they ate, Alara spoke about Earth's traditions, how families gathered at tables, how laughter filled rooms, how food brought hearts closer. The Empress listened intently. "Do you ever dine with your people?" Alara asked gently. The Empress shook her head. "No, a ruler must remain above." Connection breeds weakness or strength, Alara said softly. It depends on what you do with it. The Empress looked at her in silence. For the first time, a faint smile appeared, small and fragile but real. You are a strange creature, Alara Vance, she said. You speak of weakness as strength. You speak of feeling as logic. Alara chuckled softly, maybe because sometimes the heart knows what the mind cannot explain. The Empress seemed to think deeply on those words. She set down her glass and looked directly at Alara. Your heart, she said slowly, is not ruled by fear. It's ruled by faith. I have never seen such a thing. Alara met her gaze calmly. Faith is just believing that something good can still happen, even when there's no proof yet. The Empress looked away, her voice soft. In my empire, we do not believe. We calculate. We predict. We control. Perhaps that is why I feel empty. Alara tilted her head. Maybe it's not too late to change that. Seraphis looked back at her, surprised. Change? A ruler cannot change. The Empire would see it as weakness. Then start small. Alara said gently. Change doesn't have to be loud. It can begin in silence. The Empress's eyes softened again. Silence, she whispered. Yes. Perhaps silence can hold meaning too. When Alara returned to her room later, she sat near the window once more. The stars outside seemed closer that night. She played another Earth song, a quiet melody of hope and belonging. Across the palace, in her private quarters, Empress Seraphis stood by her own window. She could hear faintly, through the network that connected her mind to the city, the sound of human music drifting through the air. It was unlike anything she had ever heard. Gentle, imperfect, alive. Her fingers trembled slightly as she touched the cold glass. For the first time in centuries, she felt warmth inside her chest. It frightened her, yet she did not stop it. The emotion she had once banned was returning, and it began with one human's kindness. That night, the Xerian palace glowed brighter than usual. Some said the Empress stayed awake, watching the stars. Others said she smiled. No one could believe it, but something deep in the Empire had shifted. The great Empire, built on logic and silence, was beginning to remember what it meant to feel. And at the center of it all was one human, who dared to speak softly, to care openly, and to believe that even the coldest hearts could still find warmth. Days turned into weeks, and yet, the meetings between Ambassador Alara Vance and Empress Seraphis IX continued. What began as formal discussions slowly became personal conversations that stretched long into the quiet hours of the night. The Xerian Empire had never seen anything like it. The Empress, who once spoke only in commands, now asked questions, not about war or policy, but about life, feelings, and humanity. The palace corridors buzzed with quiet rumors. Some said the human had bewitched the Empress. Others said the Empress was studying her like an experiment. But those closest to Seraphis saw something different, a softness in her eyes, a pause before her words, a small but unmistakable change. One evening, Alara was invited again to the royal chamber, a wide hall of shimmering silver and living light. The floor reflected the stars, and soft blue energy flowed through the air like water. The Empress stood by the great window looking out at her empire. From this height, the city below looked endless. Billions of lights, all perfectly ordered, all perfectly quiet. When she spoke, her voice was calm but thoughtful. Your world is full of noise, she said. I have watched your cities through the network. They sing, they argue, they move. It is chaos, Alara smiled. Maybe. But sometimes chaos is just another word for life. The Empress turned to face her. Her expression was unreadable, but her tone was curious. And yet your people survive it. You find meaning in disorder. Alara nodded softly. Yes, we don't try to control every moment. We let things happen. Sometimes the best things come from what we don't expect. The Empress looked away again, her gaze distant. I once believed everything could be predicted. Every emotion, every thought, every movement, all could be controlled by logic. And yet, she paused. Alara waited patiently. And yet what, Your Majesty? Seraphis's voice lowered. And yet here you stand, a single human, unmeasured and unpredictable, and my mind cannot define you. Alara smiled kindly. Maybe that's good. Maybe not everything should be defined. For the first time, the Empress did not answer. She simply looked at Alara, not as a ruler looking at a diplomat, but as someone trying to understand something far deeper. Their conversations grew longer each night. They talked about laughter, loss, and what it meant to be alive. Lyra told her about how humans celebrated simple things, birthdays, music, or sunsets. She told her how people cried when moved by a song, or how they smiled at strangers for no reason. The Empress listened, her silver eyes bright but soft. "Your kind feels too much," she said once. "If you live so briefly, why spend so much of it in emotion?" "Because it's what makes our short lives beautiful," Lyra answered gently. "We feel because it reminds us that every day matters." Seraphis fell silent. The words sank deep inside her. She had ruled for more than 1,000 years, but when she looked back, all those years felt the same. Calm, perfect, and empty. That night, she couldn't rest. For the first time in centuries, she felt restless, a strange ache that had no name. A week later, Lyra was invited to a royal event, a ceremony celebrating the Empire's long peace. The Empress rarely attended such gatherings, but this time she did. The hall was filled with light and color. Alien nobles wore glowing robes, and the air was thick with the scent of crystal flowers. Lyra felt out of place, but the Empress noticed her from across the room and beckoned her closer. When Lyra approached, the crowd went silent. The Empress looked radiant. Her robe glowed faintly like dawn. "Ambassador," Seraphis said softly, "do your people celebrate peace?" Lyra smiled. "Yes, we do, but not with silence. We celebrate with music, stories, and dance." "Dance?" the Empress repeated, curious. "We have no such thing here." Lyra hesitated. "Would you like to see it?" The crowd murmured in shock, but the Empress raised her hand. "Show me." A gentle tune began to play from Lyra's device, an old earth melody, slow and soft. Lyra stepped onto the open floor and began to move gracefully, her movements flowing like water. Her steps told a story of freedom, hope, and heart. Everyone watched in silence, even the Empress. The music filled the hall, touching something deep inside them all. When the song ended, Lyra bowed slightly. "That's what we call dance. It's how we express what words can't say." The Empress didn't speak for a long moment. Then quietly she said, "It is beautiful." And for the first time in 1,000 years, the Empress herself clapped her hands, and softly once, twice. The hall was stunned. The nobles looked at each other, unsure what to do, until the Empress spoke again. "Beauty does not require logic," she said calmly. "Let this be remembered." From that night on, whispers spread through the Empire. Whispers of the human who made the Empress smile. Weeks later, the time for the final treaty meeting arrived. The agreement between Earth and the Xerian Empire was ready to be signed. It would be the first step toward peace, trade, and cooperation between their worlds. The meeting was private. Only the Empress and Lyra were present in the great crystal chamber. The table glowed softly with symbols of both worlds. As Lyra reviewed the final document, she noticed the Empress wasn't watching the treaty. She was watching her. "You have changed my people," Seraphis said quietly, "and you have changed me." Lyra looked up. "I didn't mean to change anyone, Your Majesty. I only wanted to share who we are." "Share," the Empress repeated. A small word, yet it carries such power. She rose from her seat and walked closer. The faint light from the table reflected in her eyes. "When I first met you, I thought you were fragile. But I see now that your strength lies not in power but in heart." Lyra felt warmth in her chest. "And I see that your heart was never gone. It was only waiting to be heard." The Empress stopped a few steps away from her. The air between them felt heavy, yet calm. "Tell me, Lyra," she said softly, "on your world, do rulers ever feel lonely?" Lyra's voice lowered. "Yes, even surrounded by people, they can feel alone." The Empress looked down at her hands that had commanded fleets, shaped worlds, and silenced rebellions, but had never once held another's in peace. "I have ruled for so long," she said quietly, "but I have never known companionship." "Not truly." Lyra took a small step closer. "You don't have to be alone." The Empress raised her gaze slowly. Their eyes met, one glowing like silver, the other warm and human. For a long moment, neither spoke. The silence stretched, filled with something neither of them could name. Then softly the Empress whispered words that would echo through history. "Are you single?" The air seemed to freeze. The palace sensors linked to her emotions flickered. Across the Empire, communication channels paused. The living network that connected her mind to the stars suddenly fell silent. Alara blinked, unsure she had heard correctly. "Your Majesty?" she asked gently. The Empress's voice trembled slightly, not with fear but with something new. "I do not understand this feeling. When I speak with you, the silence inside me fades. I wish to know what this is." Alara smiled softly, understanding. "It's called connection. It's what happens when two souls understand each other." Seraphis nodded slowly, her gaze softening. "Connection," she repeated. "Then perhaps for once I would like to feel it, not as an empress but as a being." The silence of her empire deepened. Billions of sensors awaited her command, but none came. For the first time in history, the Empress of the Xerians, the being of logic and perfection, had chosen to listen to her heart. And the Empire, sensing her emotion through their shared network, stood still in awe. That night, no orders were given, no lights dimmed. The Empire simply paused. Alara stood beside the Empress, watching the quiet stars outside the crystal window. "Your Empire is waiting," she said softly. Seraphis smiled faintly. "Let them wait. For once, I want them to see that silence does not mean control. It means peace." The human and the Empress stood side by side. Two beings from different worlds, yet somehow the same. And in that stillness, a new kind of power was born. Not of fear, not of force, but of understanding. The night after the question, the Empire no longer felt the same. The grand chambers of the Xerian palace, once filled with the soft hum of energy currents, now carried a strange silence. It was not the peaceful kind. It was heavy, uncertain, as if the entire empire was holding its breath. The Empress, Seraphis IX, stood at the center of her throne room. Around her, hundreds of crystal columns glowed faintly, each one connected to the Empire's neural network, a system that linked her thoughts to her people. It was how she ruled, how her commands spread across the stars in seconds. But now that link flickered. The emotions that had awakened inside her after Alara's question made the network unstable. Her advisors, a group of tall, silver-skinned beings with glowing marks on their heads, stood nearby in confusion. They had never seen the Empress pause. She was their perfection, their order, the mind that guided billions. But now her expression was soft, too soft, and her heart beat in a rhythm the machines could not understand. "Your Majesty," one advisor said carefully, "the neural waves are fluctuating. Systems across 5 sectors are reacting strangely. We do not understand the cause." Seraphis did not answer. Her gaze was lost somewhere beyond the glowing walls. She remembered the human envoy's words, the warmth in Alara's eyes, and the soft tone of her voice. That single question, "Are you single?" had not been just words. It had been an echo of something greater, something human. The Empress closed her eyes. "I will speak to her," she finally said. Alone. The advisors looked at one another. They wanted to protest, but none dared. The Empress's voice still carried authority, even when touched by emotion. Alara Vance stood at the edge of the Imperial balcony, staring at the city below. The Xerian capital glowed like a sea of silver and blue light. Towers reached into the clouds and skyships moved silently through the air. It was beautiful, perfect, but to Alara, it also felt lonely. She had noticed the change in the people's eyes. The Xerians who once looked at her with cold curiosity now seemed uncertain. Their Empress's sudden silence had confused them. It was as if the entire empire had lost its rhythm. When the tall doors behind her opened, Alara turned. The Empress entered, her steps graceful but slower than before. The air around her shimmered faintly with the energy of her mind link. "Alara," Seraphis said quietly, "something has changed. My people can feel it. I can feel it too." Alara smiled faintly. "Maybe that's not a bad thing." The Empress looked at her, puzzled. "Not bad. My empire trembles. The systems are unstable. The people await commands I cannot give. They are afraid." "And you?" Ilara asked softly. Are you afraid too? Seraphis hesitated. For a ruler who had faced wars, rebellions, and galactic storms, it was strange to admit such a thing, but there was honesty in the human's question, an honesty that demanded truth. I do not know what this feeling is, she said, but it makes me question everything I have been. Ilara walked closer, her voice calm and gentle. You've ruled through logic all your life, but logic alone cannot guide hearts. You gave your people peace, but you took away their emotions. Maybe now, it's time to give them both. The Empress lowered her eyes. Her heart, or whatever the Xerians called the source of their life, pulsed unevenly. You speak as if emotion is strength. It is, Ilara replied. It's what connects us. It's what gives meaning to everything we build. For a long moment, neither spoke. The soft hum of the city filled the silence. Then, the Empress said quietly, When I asked you that question, I did not understand why. Ilara smiled. You didn't need to. It came from something real. That night, the network reached its limit. Across the Empire, communication arrays flickered. Ships drifted off course. Cities dimmed. The collective consciousness that linked every Xerian to their Empress trembled under the storm of emotions flowing through her. Advisors rushed into the control halls trying to stabilize the systems. The neural core is overloading, one of them shouted. The Empress's signal is unstable, spreading unfiltered emotions to every citizen. What kind of emotions? Another asked. Unclear. Warmth, confusion, empathy, and something like affection. The Xerians stared at each other. Such words had not been used in their empire for centuries. The Empress appeared before them as a projection, her form surrounded by soft golden light. Do not fear, she said. You are feeling what I feel. You are remembering what we once were. Her voice echoed across thousands of worlds. For the first time, it was not just a command. It was comfort. The people listened, their perfect order shaking, but their hearts waking up. Ilara stood beside the Empress in the command hall. She watched as screens filled with images of planets, cities glowing brighter, crowds gathering in wonder, people reaching out to one another. It was like watching a civilization wake from a long sleep. You are changing them, Ilara whispered. You're giving them life again. I am breaking them, the Empress replied softly. They were never meant to feel. Ilara shook her head. They were never meant to be machines. You're reminding them they're alive. The Empress turned her gaze to Ilara. Her expression softened again, and for a moment the glow in her eyes flickered like a candle. You have done what no weapon or army could. You made my empire silent. Not from fear, but from awe. Ilara smiled faintly. Then it's a good silence. Seraphis stepped closer, her long robe brushing against the smooth floor. When you leave, this feeling may fade. What then? Then you keep it alive, Ilara said. Share it. Let them see art, music, kindness, things humans treasure. Don't let this silence turn into fear again. The Empress looked away, her mind deep in thought. I once believed emotion was weakness, but now, it feels like freedom. In the following days, the Empire began to change. The once uniform tones of the capital started to shimmer with new colors. People painted their halls, sang quietly to themselves, and spoke in voices filled with curiosity rather than command. The Xerians, who had long worked as perfect, emotionless beings, now smiled, laughed awkwardly, and even cried, emotions they had no words for. The Council of Purity, a group of strict overseers, tried to restore order. They approached the Empress, warning her that such changes could destroy everything they built. Your Majesty, one of them said, the Empire cannot function on feeling. It must be ruled by logic. If this continues, we will lose control. Seraphis stood tall before them, her golden eyes glowing calmly. Then perhaps control is not what we need. The council members fell silent. None dared challenge her again. One evening, Ilara prepared to leave. Her mission was complete. The treaty signed, the connection between humanity and the Xyrians established. But as she looked at the silent stars above, she felt a strange sadness. The Empress came to see her off. "You are returning to your world," she said, "but you leave behind something greater than an agreement." Lyra smiled softly. "I leave behind hope." The Empress looked at her, almost wistful. "Your people, they live short lives, yet you carry such light." "Maybe that's why we value feelings," Lyra said, "because we don't have forever to experience them." For a moment, the Empress reached out, her hand almost touching Lyra's. "Will we meet again?" Lyra nodded. "If the stars allow it." As the human ship rose into the sky, the Empress watched in silence. Her empire, once built on logic and perfection, now pulsed with quiet life. The neural network glowed softly, not with cold data, but with warmth and color. Across the empire, billions felt what their ruler felt: peace, curiosity, and the faint spark of love. The Xyrian Empire had trembled, yes, but it had not fallen. It had awakened. And somewhere in that vast silence, the memory of a single question still echoed softly. "Are you single?" It was no longer a question of romance. It was a question that had reminded a ruler and an entire civilization what it truly meant to feel. The stars over the Xyrian Empire glimmered softly, casting a silver light across the endless cityscape of Varian. The towers glowed like crystalline rivers, and the skyships floated silently above the streets. But now there was something new in the air, something subtle yet powerful. The silence of the Empire had changed. It was no longer the cold, controlled quiet that demanded obedience. It was a quiet that held life, hope, and a hint of something more, something the Xyrians had not felt for centuries. The change had begun with one human, Lyra Vance, and one question from their ruler, Empress Seraphis IX. "Are you single?" That single whisper had shaken the Empire, and now its effects were spreading like sunlight through the long shadows of a frozen world. Lyra had returned to Earth, her ship leaving the glowing towers of Varian behind. She looked out at the stars, thinking of the Empress, of the empire she had touched, and of the future that awaited them both. The treaty had been signed, not just a document of trade and alliance, but a symbol of trust and connection between two civilizations. Humans were no longer seen as a minor species. They were the ones who had reminded an ancient empire of its heart. Yet even far from Varian, Lyra knew her work was not done. She had planted a seed, but it would be the Empress who nurtured it. Back on Varian, the Empress walked through the streets of her capital, unguarded for the first time in centuries. She observed her people, not as a ruler seeking order, but as a being curious about life. Children laughed as they played among the silver towers, their voices ringing like wind chimes. Citizens painted murals on the walls depicting scenes of stars, forests, and oceans, concepts they had never experienced, yet were inspired to imagine. Musicians strummed instruments they had built from crystal and energy, creating melodies that filled the streets with warmth. Seraphis watched quietly. For centuries, her empire had been perfect but cold. Now it was alive. She realized that peace was not only the absence of conflict, it was the presence of feeling. The Council of Purity, the most conservative group of Xyrian leaders, gathered to discuss this new order. They were uneasy. "Your Majesty," one began, "our systems are no longer predictable. Citizens feel something they cannot understand." "We fear chaos," the Empress shook her head gently. "Do not fear what you do not understand. These feelings are not chaos, they are life. The people are discovering themselves as I am discovering myself." Another council member spoke, his voice trembling. "But what if this change weakens the Empire?" Seraphis's gaze was calm, steady, and strong. "No, what weakens an empire is fear. What strengthens it is understanding, connection, and heart." A quiet murmur spread through the council chamber. They realized that for the first time they were being asked not to obey blindly, but to think, to feel, and to grow. Meanwhile, the network that connected the Empress's mind to her empire pulsed softly with life. Unlike before, when it carried only commands and calculations, it now transmitted curiosity, hope, and compassion. Xyrians everywhere felt it. They paused, looked around, and discovered something long buried inside themselves. Some smiled without reason. Some sang softly, Some simply stopped and listened to the quiet, letting it fill them with calm. And in that quiet, for the first time, they understood what their empress had been hiding from them, that life was meant to be experienced, not merely survived. Months passed. The changes in the Xyrian Empire continued. Cities that had been monochrome and orderly now shone with color, music, and art. Scholars studied emotions, not to control them, but to understand them. Children were taught to express themselves, to dream, to imagine. Even the Empress's throne room changed. The great crystal pillars now glimmered with patterns of light that reflected her people's creativity. Music played softly from hidden devices. Paintings of distant worlds adorned the walls. And at the center, Seraphis herself stood, calm, radiant, and alive with warmth. She remembered the human who had taught her these lessons. Alara's words, her laughter, her patience. They had shifted the Empress's understanding of power. Leadership, Seraphis realized, was not about control. It was about guidance, protection, and inspiration. One day, a message arrived from Earth. A small transmission carried across light years of space. The Empress opened it carefully. It was from Alara. "Your empire sings now. The stars themselves are brighter because of what you have done. Thank you, Your Majesty, for letting me show you the heart that beats within humanity. May it guide your people for generations to come." The Empress smiled, her silver eyes softening. For the first time, she felt no loneliness. She was not alone, and neither were her people. She sent a response. "Your presence reminded me that even the strongest empire can be fragile without heart. We will honor what you have shown us, and perhaps one day we will meet again." Across the empire, Xyrians celebrated not with strict rituals, but with joy. They created music that had never existed before, combining sound and energy in ways only a living, feeling civilization could. Children danced, laughter echoed through the towers, and families gathered to share stories. The Empress walked among them, unafraid and unguarded. She listened to the music, watched the dance, and smiled as her people discovered life again. And though the Empire had once feared the human who walked among them, now they revered her for a different reason. She had reminded them of something even they had forgotten, that to feel is to be alive. Years later, Alara returned to Varian. She had traveled through countless star systems representing humanity, but nothing compared to this moment. The Empress greeted her personally. "Welcome home," Seraphis said softly. "Your people taught us how to feel. You taught me how to lead with heart, and for that I am grateful." Alara smiled. "It was never just me. It was humanity, and now your empire." The two stood together looking out at the city. Music floated through the streets, laughter echoed in the towers, and light shimmered like water on glass. The empire, once a place of perfect control, had become something far greater, alive, vibrant, and free. For the first time, the Empress spoke words she had never allowed herself before. "You have changed everything," she said, almost in a whisper. Alara laughed softly. "Sometimes one question is all it takes." The Empress tilted her head, and for a moment the galaxy itself seemed to pause. Then she said softly and with a quiet power, "Then let this question be remembered, for it has brought life to my empire." And so the Xyrian Empire entered a new era. Its cities were bright, its people full of curiosity and emotion, and its leader, once silent, cold, and unfeeling, now ruled with heart as well as mind. The galaxy watched in awe as the Empress's empire thrived like never before. News of the human envoy spread across countless star systems, and humans were no longer considered a minor species. They were the ones who had reminded an ancient empire of life, love, and the beauty of connection. Even the stars seemed to shine brighter in the night sky, as if celebrating the awakening of an empire that had once been silent. And somewhere in the quiet of a crystal tower, the Empress looked at Alara and whispered softly, not just to her, but to the universe itself. "Silence can be golden, but heart is eternal." The empire had fallen silent once, but now it sang, not with fear, not with obedience, but with life. And that was the greatest power of all.